Hey, good day, everybody. This is Michael here, and I wanted to talk to you today about putting your beliefs on trial. As always, we're going to put the date up here, and we're going to write, put your beliefs on trial. What does that actually mean? That's what we're going to get into today. So, in my own experience of life, what ended up happening with me was I reached a point where the pain of life became too great. The pain of remaining as is, right? The risk of change wasn't so much a risk anymore because the pain of life became too great. I knew I couldn't do this anymore. But what I also knew was that the same thing kept showing up in my life. We have heard of the Ouroboros, right? This is the snake. There you go. This is the snake eating its tail, right? Eating itself. It's a continual cycle, right? This is what happens. This is what happens with our beliefs when our beliefs go unexamined, because our beliefs sit in our subconscious or our unconscious. And this is where the programming sits, right? And we are mostly unaware of the beliefs that have been imprinted on us. We are mostly unaware of the way that they are playing out until they have repeated in such a way that we start seeing a pattern. Or until we just simply become aware, maybe somebody reflects something back to us and says, hey, why do you always do this? It's like, oh, well, that's interesting. I didn't know I did that, right? Because we're unaware of it. Because these beliefs and these things are behaviors, the way that we act, the expressions in the external world, what's going on out here, everything on the canvas of our life is merely a reflection of what is in here that is coming out. It is what is our belief system in here. What is part of the programming? The beliefs are part of the programming that gets instilled with us. Some of this programming comes through the teachings of others. Some of it comes from just simply being in an environment and seeing what is being modeled, right? Some of it comes through the experiences. It's all experience, of course, but the experiences that we have where we touch a hot stove and we're like, I ain't going to do that again, right? We learn something from that experience. Experience creates something. It's like, hey, don't touch hot stoves. If the stove's on, don't touch it. That becomes a belief. That becomes a rule that's within your programming. But many of these things occur, right? Much of what is imprinted within here, because everything goes back to energy, much of what is imprinted within here is even before we had the ability to verbalize anything. Think about a baby, right? My grandson, about 2.5 years old now. And, for the first year, they don't utter any words. But yet during that first year, and even during the gestation period, the 9-month gestation period, right? They are picking up energy, energy, energy. They are also taking in information. They're taking in all kinds of information, which is frequency, right? All frequency contains information. So they're taking in all of these energetics of the environment. And that is all getting put in and translated in some form into this programming. And then beliefs are also a part of that. So we need to put our beliefs on trial. And going back to what I started with, the pain of life had become too great. I had recognized in my own life that yes, the faces of the people and the places that I'm in, or the places that I'm living, etc., or where I'm having the experience, the faces and places have changed, but things keep happening. The same damn thing keeps happening. My life keeps blowing up. And it wasn't until it got really, really bad where I had to say, wait a minute, wait, I cannot do this anymore. And I knew that, yes, I was not responsible for the behaviors that these other individuals were doing that was inflicting great pain upon me. And yet at the same time, I also knew there was something in here that was in some way, shape, or form creating this or allowing for this. I knew enough to say, yeah, the faces and places have changed, but the common denominator is me. What is it about me that is continually finding myself in these situations? And at that time, I had no idea that it had anything to do with beliefs. So as I began my inner work, my inner journey, right, to say, okay, what is it here? I can blame these individuals or whatever the entity is all day long. And it's not to say that sometimes that's not warranted. I mean, you do have to be able to separate out, listen, this was my part of what I played in this dynamic. This was their part. And sometimes, not in all cases, but sometimes there is absolutely just, hey, I'm standing here. You came up for some reason, punched me in the head out of nowhere, right? That's completely on the other person. That's theirs. That's not yours. So we have to get some clear definition. And back then, back when my life was an absolute mess, I could not sort out what was mine versus what was another person's versus what was another person's. I was so enmeshed, especially with the people, with the persons that I was intimately involved with. I would become so enmeshed in them that Michael did not exist. I'm going to do another video about having to disappear and the eradication of self um, in terms of being taught that I needed to be everybody's Jesus because I might be the only Jesus that they would ever see. So stay tuned for that one. But putting your beliefs on trial, we got to go back. We got to look at what is going on in here. And that's what I had to do in my life. What is going on in here that is allowing for this? Why is it that I'm attracted to certain people that in the end are not good for me? That in the end end up with a lot of suffering, end up with a lot of pain, etc., and heartache, right? And why is it that other people that I know are good for me, I'm completely bored with them, right? And this had to do with a bunch of things within myself. Now I'm going to bring it up a little bit from that. But I want you to ask the question. As I've talked about here, most of our beliefs are instilled within us at a very young age, right? It's through, we all come in with a certain blueprint, with a certain template. You talk to parents who've had multiple kids, they will say that those kids are different right out of the gate, right? No two are the same. So you do come in with your own blueprint, with your own temperament. There's no doubt about that. But you also have your own experiences. And even if you're in the same environment being raised, and those two people experience the exact same thing from an external perspective, each of them is interpreting that situation in their own unique way. And that interpretation of that information gets into the programming and becomes the beliefs through which they operate from. Most of us inherit our beliefs through our religion, culture, education, through our experiences. But rarely do we question, why do we believe what we believe? And true transformation begins with examining those beliefs and putting your beliefs on trial. I'm going to say, and I'm going to argue, that one of the greatest acts of courage is not in defending your beliefs, but it is actually in your willingness to question your belief, to really question your belief and go deep into it. To kind of pull that thread in the metaphorical sweater and say, what if one of the beliefs that shaped your entire life simply isn't true? Like a belief of mine that shaped my entire life is, I may be the only Jesus somebody ever sees. Right? Based on that belief, based on the belief that it is my responsibility to try to emulate and be the perfection of Jesus, right? Which is completely ridiculous. But based upon those beliefs, that is the way I oriented my life. That is the way I tried to live my life. It ended up with a lot of denial. It ended up with a lot of repression and suppression going on. And it ultimately ended up with me going, who am I? I don't even really know who I am. So when we put our beliefs on trial, I want to look at this verse because this plays into why we put our beliefs on trial. Romans 12:2 says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. I love that verse, right? Because in order to get my life straight, in order to work things out for me, I had to go within. That's why we have all is within. That's why I talk about all is within. Everything that you need exists within you. But we have to go within. We have to look at how and what is playing out in our lives. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Transformation does not start out there. That's generally what we try to do. We say, okay, well, I have a problem. I have problem A, right? Problem A is this. Problem A is out there. I'm going to go through a couple examples of my own life, right? Problem A is out there. How do I fix this? How do I fix this out there? Yet many of the problems that we experience in life are actually generated from in here. And that was one of the things when I was trying to fix the relationship problems I was having in my life. What do we normally do? We're saying, well, the problem is A. The problem is over there. The problem is the other person or the entity, right? It's them. That's the problem. If they would just get their shit right, all of this would work fine, right? But we are ignoring, well, how are we contributing? How are we co-creating in this dynamic in some way, right? If I'm over here and I'm completely don't have any boundaries, don't really have the ability to say no because I've learned to silence my voice because I know that if I speak my opinion, if I speak my truth, that World War III is going to start, right? I have some role in that dynamic of what is going on. Now, granted, I've already gone down the path of trying to speak my voice, of trying to give my opinion, of trying to have my thoughts and feelings and expressing those in a healthy way. But that is not met with good reciprocation, healthy discussion, right? Instead, it's just war. When we're looking at this type of thing, we have to come back and we have to say, well, what's going on within me? And this is why Romans 12:2 is so powerful. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. It is not saying be transformed. If you transform something, you change it, right? You change it. It's not the same anymore. If you transform something, you don't start over there with the transformation. If I can just fix that thing, all this will be fixed. We've all been in jobs, right? You have a manager. The manager's great. Everything's going so smooth. They do a reorganization of some sort. All of a sudden, you get a new manager. All of a sudden, things are crappy. All of a sudden, things aren't going as well as they had been going before. And in fact, you may even be have moved from a high performing individual to somebody who is now deemed a problem child of sorts, right? And the dynamic here is that we have to go out and we have to be willing to look inside ourselves and say, what is the way I'm contributing to this? Maybe I'm contributing this in some way. Maybe I'm not. Transformation is an inside job. What do we do when we can't alter the situation out here? There are some situations that you're in. I found it true to be in a job. I found it true to be in some of my relationships where I could change my dynamic within here all I wanted to. But this dynamic out here, they have their own belief system at work, right? And it was not going to change. And it simply was, well, this is not equitable, is not a good match for this anymore, right? What once was a good match with the previous manager has now become not a match. And so I can choose to stay in that, or I can choose to just accept and say, hey, this is not a match for me anymore. I've got to go find something else. I know I got a little off track there with that particular example, so I want to go back to transform by the renewing of your mind. It does not say to renew someone else's mind, right? Here in these examples with the job, with the relationship, whatever entity it is, right? I can sit here and I can try to upgrade myself, say, how is it that I'm contributing to this? And I can make some changes for myself. But this other individual over here with free will, this other entity, whatever it is, they're operating on their own belief system for their own reasons, coming from their subconscious programming, right? And I may or may not be able to have an impact here. All I have really control over is me. And if I'm finding that I'm jumping through hoops, that I'm trying to make these changes internally here, and yet the situation out here is still negative, is still unhealthy, is still dysfunctional, well, then that simply comes back to me. It doesn't mean I'm going to continue to try to change this element, whatever this element is out here. No, it means, well, this is the dynamic. This is the situation, right? This piece over here is not going to change until that person, entity, or whatever this is makes some changes over here on their side. But what I know now for me is this is no longer a match, right? So I then have choice. I then have options. I have done my part by looking at this and finally coming to a place and saying, yes, I've made some changes, but nothing in this dynamic is changing yet because this individual or entity is involved and doesn't want to meet me in this transformation, and that's okay. So that puts me back to choices, right? Choices to make changes for myself. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So what that means is it's not about changing the other person or the other entity. It's changing your own mind. It's looking within here and saying, this is an inside job. What is within me that is allowing for this dynamic? When we recognize the dynamic is unhealthy, that our needs are not being met, that it's not a match anymore, that there's an unequal distribution there of healthiness, an unequal distribution of power in the relationship, because there needs to be balance, there needs to be flow, there needs to be reciprocity, there needs to be respect, there needs to be mutual respect and love and honor, not only for ourselves but for the other, and back and forth this goes, right? When we recognize that this isn't the case, what I did for years and years and years was just continue to stay in, right? That's because my belief system said that's what I need to do. It's my responsibility to fix these things. It's my responsibility to take care of everything that's out here. The other person, the other entity has no responsibility in that. And yet what I found was that over and over and over and over again, no matter how much I gave, no matter how much I loved, no matter how much I tried, no matter how much I put effort in, the only thing that was happening was I was becoming worse. And I was becoming more and more exhausted. I was becoming more and more resentful because I was trying to change things in the outer world. And or even if I was changing things in here because I was doing work on myself at the time, I couldn't figure out why my changes weren't impacting this outer world. But I wasn't going deep enough into my inner world, into my inner changes to reach a point that said, is this dynamic working for you at all anymore, Michael? And the reason I didn't go that deep is because I didn't want to ask that question. I didn't want to question my belief. I didn't want to question that relationship, whatever that kind of relationship was. Because if I questioned it at that deep of a level and saying, does this work for you anymore? If you're honest with yourself, if you have the courage to be honest with yourself and say, does this work for me anymore? I knew that the answer would be no. And that would bring up a whole other dilemma that I now have to face. This is why so many people don't question their own beliefs. And the sad part is, this is the experience of all of us, right? We start off, we have these experiences, we create this programming, this belief systems that live within us. And from those beliefs, that's how we operate in the world. All information that comes into us through our five senses that we take in is filtered through this programming, is filtered through these beliefs. But these were beliefs that were things that once supported us in these experiences when we were a young child. And those beliefs, that programming then continues to operate as we become an adult and get into adult relationships. And then we can't figure out why these relationships aren't working. And it's because we're using programming and beliefs that were built back here, that were built when we were just children. And they don't necessarily work anymore. On computers, we do upgrades a lot. And back in the old days, you'd have your operating system and they would come out with an upgrade. They found a better way to do things. Now, lots of times, they just make changes to make changes. That's a different story. But back early on, when they made improvements, the improvements actually seemed like improvements. Things were faster, things were better, things were a little bit more intuitive, they were more user-friendly, etc. Right? Because they realized, hey, what we built before was pretty great, But we've also noticed there's some deficiencies, there's some gaps, there's some things here that could be improved upon. And so they would make those improvements. And this is what we are talking about when we're talking about be transformed by the renewing of your mind, right? Where you come to the experiences in your adult life and you have to start questioning, what is the programming that is running within me? What are the beliefs that is running within me? Why am I putting up with this? Why do I continually do these behaviors? Why do I continually fall back into the same pattern? Right? It is something within here. And it is a transformation by the renewing of your own mind. It's not by changing and fixing things out there, because all change comes from the inside out. Your outer world, your relationships out here are simply a reflection of what is in here and what you believe about yourself in here and what you believe about others. I want to talk a little bit about this awesome word that's in here, because it says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And I thought, well, renewing isn't really a good translation there. Because what do we think of when we renew something, right? We think of when we renew something, we all have subscriptions to streaming services in today's day and age. So when you renew something, I got to get a new blue marker. Blue's my favorite, if you haven't guessed. What happens when we renew something, right? This could be a driver's license. This could be a subscription to a streaming service. It just automatically renews. It stays the same, right? Nothing fundamentally changes. Nothing fundamentally changes. And I want to write that down. You go in and get your license. You go to renew your license. Nothing really fundamentally changes. They may check your eyesight, do those things again. But for the most part, you still end up with a driver's license. You're still able to do the same things, right? Your subscription service to your streaming service, right? Just says, oh, hey, guess what? New month or new year, we're going to renew your subscription. You're going to get the exact same thing you had previously. It's just a copy of it, right? And we'll continue to propagate that forward as much as you want to renew that. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. I don't like the translation of renew there, because if we look at the Greek is this. Anakinosis. Ana breaks down to up, again, back, or anew. And it carries a sense of upward movement. Kainos is new in quality, fresh, transformed. It is not simply a copy of the same thing. So what I like to say here is, instead of being transformed by the renewing of your mind, because we don't want to just keep perpetually doing the same thing, because that gets us back here into the Ouroboros, right? Gets us back here repeating the same cycles and having these patterns show up in our life, right? Instead, be transformed by the renovation of your mind, of your internal world, right? Think about renovation. Renovation, for instance, like in a house, requires making an upgrade. I'm going to renovate this place. You're not going to use the same rotted out wood that is there to renovate the place, to renew the place. You're going to get the same wood of good, new quality in order to renovate this place so that it has a strong, firm foundation and structure to it again. When we put our beliefs on trial, we need to ask things like, it means to question our beliefs. Where did this belief come from? Why do I actually believe this? And I'm gonna challenge you, because we can say, well, my teacher told me, or my mom and dad told me, or whatever. Okay, that's great, that's fine. But still, why do you believe it? Right? Why do you believe this? And does it support you in your life now? The way your life is now, this belief may have served you awesome. At some point, the belief did serve you in a great way. Otherwise, you wouldn't have it. It got you through a moment. That is something that we definitely know, because you're here now at a new moment in time, right? But maybe that belief is no longer supporting you. Maybe it's actually having a negative effect or a negative impact on your life. It's creating imbalance in your life in some way. And I want to challenge those of you who just say, well, my belief came from my teacher, or came from this religious upbringing or something of that nature. I want you to say, okay, that's fine. Some of you will just go to the Bible and will just say, well, this verse right here says it. That's why I believe it. Okay, that's fine as well. But how deep are you going to go into that? Are you just going to quote the verse off and say, well, my interpretation of that verse is absolutely correct, and that's why I believe that, and that's it, end of story? Do you go back, do you look at the Greek? Right? Do you go back and do you say, well, I'm quoting this verse here, but how many translations out there are there? And all the manuscripts that were written where this stuff was originally translated from anyways, they're all second, third, fourth generation manuscripts. Even when you start from the translations, then you have translation upon translation after that, right? You need to go back and you need to dig deep, you need to go in, and it takes courage to do that. You need to look at your beliefs and say, is this belief actually true for me anymore? That's a hard thing. When I came to the realization of, do I believe in Jesus the same way that I used to believe in Jesus? Do I believe the things of God in the same way I believed when I was younger, when I was in my 20s or something like that, right? The simple fact is I had to put these things to test in my own life, and as things were coming up in my own life, I was starting to understand, well, wait a minute, maybe some of these things that I've adhered to in my belief system, they don't seem to be operating the way I was told that they would operate. I'm not getting out of life the experiences that I desire to have out of life. When we put a belief on trial, it's not to go out and judge that belief and say that belief is bad. Oh my God, where did that belief come from? And this person or this entity or whatever that this belief came from. Well, now I have to judge them and that's bad. No, it's not to destroy it. It's not to defend it. It's just to look at it with open curiosity, right? That's what a kid does. That's what a kid does in the world. Kid comes across something new. It's like, what is this? I don't know what this is. Oh, look, well, I can take this off. And then they try to write with this piece. Well, nothing happens. They try to write with this piece. Oh, look it, something comes out. Like, that's discovery, right? That's part of examining what you have there. It's getting curious. And I understand that it's very hard sometimes when some of the beliefs that you have carried, when you look at them, you can begin to see for some of the beliefs, wow, that belief really messed a lot of things up in my life and caused a lot of pain, caused a lot of suffering, maybe not only for you, but also maybe for other people in your life. And it's not to shame yourself. It's not to become guilt-ridden about those things. It's about looking at that belief honestly and saying, okay, at one point that belief served me and supported me. But now it doesn't seem to. And now I have the choice to let go of that belief, to put a new belief in its place, to operate in a different way, to change things internally, because once you change them within here, they will begin to be reflected in your external life, or what I call the canvas of life in front of you. I want to bring up this thing until we make the unconscious conscious, until we make the unconscious our programming and our beliefs here that live in our unconscious or our subconscious, until we make the unconscious conscious, until we become aware of the fact that this belief is there, then it will direct your life and you will call it fate. There's a famous quote by Carl Jung, the Swiss psychoanalyst. Brilliant man. And that is our job in examining beliefs. It's to become aware of that which we are unaware of. And we become aware of things by experiences in our life and by noticing patterns in our life and by, at times, listening to the feedback and the reflections that others give us about ourselves. So when you're looking at these, you may put on trial your religious beliefs. Right? Maybe you put on trial your political beliefs. Maybe you put on trial beliefs about yourself and about who you should be. Maybe it's beliefs about money, a bigger home, beliefs about relationships, beliefs about worthiness. The point, again, is not to attack your beliefs, but to consciously choose them instead of unconsciously living your life from them and wondering why your life isn't working the way you want. So, an example of mine that I'm working on right now is my belief about money or about possibly a bigger home. I've lived in an apartment now for years. I used to own a home back in previous marriages and this and that, right? And what I've noticed is I'm reaching a point in my apartment life where it's like I'm looking for something new. I kind of feel maxed out here. I've created a home of peace. It's a wonderful place. But of course, the place of peace is truly in here, right? So I'm able to create that. And I've been able to create that in my external world of my apartment. But as I look at more money and bringing in more abundance and maybe having a bigger apartment or maybe owning a home again or anything, I noticed that my body would feel this contraction, that I would immediately start going like, no, 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 that feels really, really heavy to me, right? And as I started to become aware of that, I thought, well, this stinks. I kind of have a desire to kind of look into these things, but now there's all this heaviness associated with that. Well, I could have just let it go. I was like, well, guess I'm just stuck here. But no, I knew enough to say, you know what? Okay, there's something in me. Where is this coming from? Because yes, there is this recognition that this fulfills my needs now. But going forward, I feel like I'm getting maxed out here. And I have other dreams, other desires that I want to bring to life that I can't bring to life in this place. It's going to require something new. It's going to require something different. And as I began to think about those new possibilities and those new opportunities and things, I would feel this constriction. I would notice my thoughts and my feelings coming up. I would feel this heaviness. And so I started saying and started looking at, well, what is there? What are you comparing this to? And I would start thinking of when I was in previous home ownership, all of the things that I had to do. And all of that was getting overlaid on this and saying, if you pick that up again, that home ownership up again, it's going to be just the same as it was. But what I had to do was sit down and really dive into it. I created a series of questions and stuff to say, what is it that you feel? What comes up when you think about this? And what I stumbled on yesterday was, well, wait a minute. Your situation in life is completely different than it was then, right? You were working 2 jobs at that time. You had a disabled wife at that time. You had 3 kids. You had 3 dogs. You had all of the stuff that you were taking care of with the house. List and list and list, and it just goes on and on and on. Plus, I was so enmeshed. Michael didn't know who Michael was. Michael didn't have boundaries hardly at all, right? I was living from a place of complete abandonment of Michael in terms of my thoughts and my feelings and things that I talked about a little bit earlier, right? So is it a fair comparison? No, it's not a fair comparison. And once I stumbled upon that, I was like, oh, it'll be completely different this time. Home ownership will be completely different this time because I am different. I have been renewed. I have been renovated, right? Because I did the inner work and I continue to do the inner work to transform my inner world, to transform and renew my mind. And so I encourage you, ChatGPT is a great thing, or any AI module. If you're having concerns about something, just express something about your life and what's going on and ask it, to create. What I do is say, can you create a shadow workbook for me? We want to do shadow work here. Can you create a shadow workbook for me where I can work through this situation? And of course, I give some context and give some dynamics of the situation. And it's really great at generating questions then and sentence stems. Sentence stems that it can use. You don't have to even define the sentence stems, but just say, I would like some sentence stems in here as well. When I think of owning a house, I feel that's a sentence stem. And you get to fill in the blank at the end, right? And so you can have ChatGPT or whatever create these things so that you can sit there and you can do that inner work, that shadow work. Shadow work is about bringing the unconscious conscious, bringing that's in the dark, that's hidden in the shadows, and making that come into your awareness, into the light of awareness, so that it can be transformed by the light. This is what it's talking about when we get into 2 Corinthians 10:5. It says, casting down imaginations and every high thing that exalted itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought into the obedience of Christ, right? That is examining your thoughts, examining your feelings, examining your inner world, and bringing them into Christ, bringing them into higher consciousness, working with them and saying, what is here? God, show me what is here. What does this mean for me? What am I not seeing in regards to this situation? What is mine in this situation? What is theirs in this situation? And generally, anything that is theirs means you don't have to deal with it. You don't have to work with it. That's not yours to transform. That's theirs to transform and take care of. The interesting thing is most people don't do this because we have so much identity. So many of our identities are built based on this programming and based on our beliefs that exist in here. And it's kind of like pulling a thread on a sweater. We've all done it, right? You see the thread, it's a frayed thread or something, and you think, well, okay, I'll just pull this one thread out, right? But what happens when you pull that thread out? All of a sudden, it's attached and connected to everything else because it's woven in through the sweater. And as you pull that one, it starts pulling a whole bunch of other things. And that's what happens when you start working with your belief system. But the great thing is, when you go deep enough and you find something that is a core belief because of the fact that everything is connected, you might have a belief out here. I have to spell it right. You might have another belief over here. I still can't spell. And then you may have a belief down here. These are all connected in some way, right? These two beliefs are connected here, maybe. And maybe they're not. Maybe they seem to be disconnected. You may be able to, if we add a few more beliefs onto here, and this one's connected to this, and we have another one here, right? Think of it like programming. If you change this belief out here, that's all you're going to change. But if you go deeper and say, well, where does this belief come from? Oh, that's interesting. It seems to be connected to this belief. And if you go deeper and you find this belief, what happens when you change this belief? When you renew, or in my words, renovate this belief. If you change this belief, look at all of the threads that this belief is attached to. Look at all of these other beliefs. When you change this core foundational belief, for instance, like my belief of needing to be everybody's Jesus, when I changed that, that had a cascading domino effect on everything. It impacted all of these other beliefs just by changing this one belief. And yes, that can be disoriented because I was used to navigating my life based on a belief like this. I was used to processing all incoming and outgoing information based on a belief like this. Now that I've changed that belief and it's impacted all of these other beliefs are then transformed into something new, and or they fall away, right? Because we realize they're no longer supportive, right? And that can create a little bit of disorientation in How do we now operate in a world without this belief, without this identity as part of who we are and as part of the way that we see and perceive and interact with the world? But that's why it's a challenge, right? That's why it's an adventure. Because if you want to continually grow, if you want to continually move forward in life, it all begins within. It is all within. Transformation begins within. It begins, as Romans 12:2 states, transformation begins with the renewing of your mind, of what is in here, of going in deep and looking at this. What I found out in my own life was many of the beliefs that I had actually created a prison for me in my own life. And in fact, when I started my healing journey, all of my passwords had the word escape in them because it seriously felt like I needed to escape the beliefs and the programming that was within here. I needed to find my way out. I needed to renew that, to renovate that within here so that I could have out here in the external world a different experience of life, a different experience of relationships. And that, my friends, is exactly what has happened and continues to happen, because this journey is just that. It's a journey. There's no point that you get to where you have finally arrived. And that's another belief, right? There's a belief that says, I remember we used to say, I can't wait till life just calms down and we can just coast for a while, right? We're looking for the end point. And the realization is there is no end point. It's a continuous path of growth, or it could be a continuous path of descent. But even in the descent, you're growing. At some point, you can take and you can learn from all of those experiences to help raise you up then into a better way of being and a better way of functioning in the world. I appreciate your time. Appreciate you listening today. Reach out if you have any questions. And as always, blessings and love to each of you.